Video games nowadays being such complicated systems with lots of variables moving around and calculating on the background that the player needs to have some access to, need to have an efficient and smart way of displaying this information for the person enjoying the game to be able to interact with and use to their advantage. Now, while this can be done through a variety of means, including some smart level design, one of the most common ways that is used not just in gaming but also in other forms of media would be UI, or user interface. But for as big of a part as UI plays in the game's experience, which is surprisingly big, you don't really see games get a lot of praise for it. I mean, when was the last time someone said, "Oh, you know what, I like that game, it has really good UI." And that's because a good UI doesn't on its own make a good game. However, a good UI can help make a game much better. Today, I'll be taking a look at different types of UI that is being used in different types of games. I'll list out the benefits and possible drawbacks for each of them. And if you're out there making your own game or just want to appreciate the games that you love a bit more, this could be some interesting or useful information to you. In the end, I'm also going to touch a little bit on the menu system and the flowcharts, but I consider this to be a much less important part of this video because that will vary greatly from game to game. Anyways, without any further ado, grab that health pack, check how much ammo you have in your magazine, and let's go. Now, first of all, for a lot of people, especially if you're not that versed in the terminology of gaming, UI can be a little bit confusing, as in, what does user interface actually stand for? Is it just the menu? Is it the controller I'm holding? Well, what I'm going to be talking about in this video is more of the in-game UI. So think of your health bar, or your stamina bar, or your reticle in the middle of the screen showing you where your gun is aiming, or maybe the number of bullets that are remaining in your gun that's displayed on the screen. It's all these types of widgets that help convey the game state and the behavior of in-game systems to the player that you can see on the screen and you can interact with. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can do UI, and of course it will vary greatly from game to game, but generally there are 4 different types I want to talk about: non-diegetic, diegetic, spatial, and meta. Now, I want to start with the non-diegetic because it's the most typical one that you see in games. If you, for example, take something like Team Fortress 2, it's everything you would see on the screen. Bullets you have remaining, you see your health bar, you see how much time there is left in the game, and you see which capture points have maybe been captured on the screen. You also get to see the kill feed at the top right, telling you who killed who and in what method. Now, the reason why this is non-diegetic is because it's in no way part of the game world. These are simply 2D widgets that are placed on your screen, which literally all they do is just display the stats from the game manager. Of course, the bonus of this is that, number one, it's fairly easy to design. The main concern there being just so that they don't obstruct the player's view and they're not too in your face, so the player can still concentrate on the game. However, on the other side, you simply decide on which metrics are important for the player and then find a nice way to put them onto the screen. It's a fairly easy system, and that's why so many games adapt it. Moving on to what could potentially be its complete counterpart, the diegetic UI. This is a UI that exists completely and entirely in the game world. The example that most people would bring up when discussing this type of UI is, for example, Dead Space, and how on the back of Isaac's suit you can see his health bar being represented as the line running down his spine, and you can also see the stasis meter being displayed to its right. Another example could be from Far Cry 2. When you pull out your map and your GPS, you actually pull them out in the real world and they act as props. This could also be said about the Journal or the Lighter from the Metro series. Now, the bonus for the diegetic UI is of course Immersion, because it keeps the player engaged without having unnecessary 2D widgets on the screen. If you are able to incorporate it into the game world, it can help the immersion, and it can also help with the affordance, and incorporating the UI is something that everyone in the game world is aware of and familiar with. On the other hand, it is a lot more difficult to implement because on one side, you need to make sure that it's visible to the player at all times when necessary, and that it's big enough and clear enough so that the players can draw all the necessary information from it. At the same time, you don't want the focus of the game to be on the UI. You don't want to build the character around this health bar that's on his back. You want to do it the other way around. And this can lead to a whole bunch of issues, especially if these types of decisions aren't tackled at the start of the development. Now, moving on to the so-called meta UI. This is technically a combination of non-diegetic UI and in-world UI, but in a way that you're still getting what are essentially 2D widgets on your screen. However, the game finds a nice way to incorporate them into the world. An example of this could be perhaps in Watch Dogs, where you pull out your smartphone and you get to see the layout of the accessible options just kind of hovering there in the middle of the screen. This is also used in games where you can jump in and, for example, see the ammo count on the side of your weapon on a holographic display. Well, essentially it is the same thing as non-diegetic UI. Because it is in the game world, it does still help with immersion similar to diegetic UI, and it can potentially avoid having unnecessary clutter on the screen, especially if you look at the example of Call of Duty, who replaces a health bar with the blood splatter effect that goes around your screen. As far as issues with this go, it kind of presents similar ones to both the previous examples. On one hand, it can be a challenge to incorporate this into the world while keeping track of your affordances and of what you can and cannot do within the game's lore. On the other hand, you do also want to make sure that in key moments of the game, the view of the player is not being obstructed by any of these widgets and they're not too distracting or too standing out of the environment for the player to be unable to focus on the rest of the gameplay. Now finally we come to the spatial UI, and the reason why I left this for last is because you don't see as much of this in its purest form in gaming nowadays, or at least not in most of the recent releases. Spatial UI is essentially another 2D widget that is incorporated into the gaming world. However, it's in a position that isn't necessarily locked to the player. As an example of this, you could have a line on the ground that leads you to the nearest quest. Or in Need for Speed, you could have the bumpers which block you off from going through with the arrows which move alongside them. This can also be taken a step further with literal text being displayed as a 3D object in the world, like for example in Splinter Cell Blacklist. Now there really isn't much to be said about this. I mean, it can sometimes be difficult as far as risks go to work together with your affordance, but if you can find a smart way to do it, and if you can link it to some sort of futuristic system or projection that your game is utilizing, it will essentially serve you as well as meta UI, and it can also help clean up the player screen by not having these messages and this information be on there constantly, but only when it's necessary and relevant to the player. Now, of course, these were the 4 types that are mainly used, and there are several exceptions out of this, and of course in most cases you would not see them individually, and you would see some sort of combination, with some UI elements being diegetic, some being non-diegetic, and some being perhaps spatial in the world. However, this does bring another risk with itself, as you need to make sure that you are at least somewhat consistent to what you're doing, so that players are not missing hints that are being shown to them on the screen just because they were expecting all of their useful UI to be right there available in their smartphone or on their weapon. Far Cry 2 partially does this mistake where a lot of the UI in the actual game world is non-diegetic, whereas it tries to do its hardest with the menu system and with the map system to keep it diegetic. Finally, I did say I was going to touch up on the menu system, but there really isn't that much to tell here. The important thing about the menu system is that it should be clear, it should allow the player to smoothly navigate through it and inform them of all of their options and of how to get to the game. It also shouldn't be overly complicated and confusing to the point where the player doesn't even know where to click to play. Now, of course, with the menus, just as with the UI, you can also get creative, and there are games that utilize menus where you literally walk around and have to maybe enter through different doors or get on different elevators to start the level. Anyways, that was it for the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All of those would be very much appreciated. If you guys have anything that you want to add, or maybe something that you think I forgot to mention, please make sure to leave it down in the comments below. I'm sure other people watching these types of videos would be interested in reading that. I want to wish you guys a bit of a rest off today, and I'm going to see you all in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.